Hey YouTube, Matt back with installment 3 of the shed build. Today it's a virtual tour of the shed project in Google Sketchup. I want to run through this and make sure that all my I's are dotted, T's are crossed, that my trim is going to fit where it's supposed to fit. And I want to start counting noses. How many 2x4s do I need? How many sheets of plywood? Because it is time to make the run down to the home center, get the materials, and start turning this shed into a reality. Here's the finished product, and it looks like a shed. Well, that's a good thing. I don't really want this thing to stick out. I don't want it to look weird in any shape or form. So I tried to make it architecturally, if there's any such thing as architectural styling for a shed. Mine's going to look kind of like the buildings around it. So I built my shed in SketchUp using layers. And I'm not going to do a SketchUp tutorial. There's thousands of them out there, and everybody knows this program better than I do, frankly. But it is really handy to keep things separate so that you can get different angles and views and see different parts of the shed. It also makes it really, really easy to select things and group them together so that SketchUp doesn't get mixed up about what's connected to what. I didn't bother to model my hole full of rock that's passing for a foundation, so the first thing in here are the 4x4 skids that are going to serve as the base for the shed. This is in keeping with the plans for pretty much every 12x16 shed out there. I contemplated bumping this up to 5 skids, but the problem is the way they're laid out right now, the skids land exactly underneath the joints in the plywood flooring. You start adding more skids to this, they start moving around and your plywood joints end up hanging out in space. That's no good. So I'm going to leave it at 4 and just assume that that's going to be plenty of support for my shed. For the floor framing, I did take a detour from the plans as published. They called for 2x6 framing on 16-inch centers. I went with 2x4 framing on 12-inch centers. And the reason I did that is right here in the front of the shed. I'm trying to keep this step from the ground up to the shed floor as low as possible. I'm going to have to build a ramp in order to get my tractor in here, and I don't want to have to build that ramp any higher than I have to. So I'm going to make this out of 2x4s, put a few more of them in there. I'm sure it's going to be just fine. The floor itself is dull, very dull, as in pressure-treated plywood dull. I didn't bother to draw in the individual sheets. It's 6 of them. They exactly fit the 12x16 footprint of the shed. By the way, for those of you who haven't bought plywood in a while, it doesn't come in 1/2 and 3/4 anymore. It comes in 17 30-seconds and 23 30-seconds. One of the other advantages of using SketchUp is that it doesn't have any preconceived notions about what a normal or strange dimension is. You just put in what you put in and everything works out. My next layer I titled Solid Walls, which is a really goofy name for it. All my walls are going to be solid when this thing is done. What I meant by this is these 2 walls, no doors or windows. So they're standard 16-inch on center 2x4 framing. There's nothing interesting about them at all. The front wall of the shed is also very standard fare. It's again 2x4 framing, 16-inch centers, but in this case we have a door. We have the 30-inch pre-hung door. Steel, uninsulated, it's a $100 door tops, but it's plenty for a shed. So I've got my jack studs, my king studs, and my 2x8 header in here, giving me the exact opening, according to the manufacturer, that I need in order to drop the pre-hung door in there without much trouble. And then lastly, the end wall of the shed is where my shed doors are going to be. These are the big ones that allow me to get the tractor in and out. I have a span of 6 foot 8 inches for this door, which is on the upper end of what you would want to span with a 2x8. The issue for me, though, is that I'm already at 8 feet tall for my shed walls from the base of the floor framing up to the top of the top plate. That's how long the sheets of siding material that I'm going to put on here are. So I don't want to make the walls any taller, and I don't want to make the opening any shorter, so I'm left with 2x8 header. It's going to be fine. Just to make absolutely sure that it's going to be fine, I put in double jack and king studs. The king studs, the extra one, frankly, I'm sure does nothing. I probably ought to take it out. The extra jack stud is kind of nice because it doubles the surface area that the header has to sit on and distributes the load a little bit better, doesn't put quite as much leverage right on the end of the header board. With all the walls in place, it's time for some rafters. And here again, I deviated a little bit from the plans as they were called for. The original shed plans had the rafters just cut off right here, even with the edge of the side wall. Then, after you put the siding on, you're supposed to come back and bolt, screw, toenail, Velcro, however you can figure it out, a thing called a fly rafter down the length of the shed. It's a 2x6 that's beveled at the same angle as the roof, which in this case is 30 degrees, so that it continues the slope of the roof on over the sides of the shed and allows the rainwater to run past the wall and drip off the shed rather than run down it. That's a good thing. You want the overhang. You want the water to go, elsewhere. But to me, it's just goofy to build roof trusses, cut them off even with the sidewall, and then screw another piece of wood on the side to extend what amounts to the roof trusses. So I sort of rejiggered these things so that the 2x4s out of which these are made are notched to sit on the top plate and then continue out a little ways past the wall. I'll cut them off at the appropriate angle so that I have a nice square corner to work with for my soffit and fascia board, and I'll extend them so that I have exactly 5.5 inches from the outside of my sheeting to the end of the rafter, so I don't even have to cut the soffit. Speaking of wall sheeting, I guess we need some. Hopefully it won't have this many knots in it, and unless my wife gets a hold of it, it's not going to be this green. Nothing special here except that I'm going to use a composite engineered product instead of real wood, whatever that is anymore these days. It's only 3/8 of an inch thick, which frankly is a little light for my tastes, but being a composite product, it won't rot, it won't crack, it won't disintegrate. It's essentially Trex for your wall if you're familiar with decking material. And it has nice interlocking mechanisms on the sides of it. So where I have corners like this where a bunch of pieces come together, the plywood, the siding material is going to be interlocked with itself as well as nailed into the studs. So I don't have to worry about these seams coming apart over time. The roof sheathing is substantially less interesting. It's 7/16 inch thick OSB. Nothing fancy about it. I'm going to get 2 4x8 sheets on the bottom here. The top sheets won't quite be 4 feet wide. I'm going to have to trim those, but that's okay. It gives me the opportunity to put a bevel on that edge so that my ridge comes together nice and tight. The first bit of trim that goes on the shed is the soffit and fascia boards. I already alluded to the soffit board earlier. It's a standard 1x6. There's nothing to it. The fascia board will get cut along its length at the same 30-degree angle as the roof, and it also has to be notched out here in the corner to accept the fly rafters. Yes, I know I spent a lot of time disparaging the fly rafters down the sides of the shed, but that was down the sides of the shed. There's nothing good to attach them to here. You've got end grain on the rafters and 3/8 inch composite siding material. They're going to sag, guaranteed. But here on the gable ends of the shed, if I turn the roof sheathing back off, you can see I have all of this meat of the rafter to go through and into the side long grain of the 2x6 fly rafter. I can put screw after screw after screw, or even lag bolts if I felt like it, through the rafter and into this, and that thing is not going anywhere over time. There's a bit more trim on the shed here on the corners. Again, this is going to be 1x3. I think I put it in there, maybe 1x4. I'll have to eyeball it, see what I like the looks of. It runs up the sides here, and it runs underneath the fly rafters. This is mostly decorative, but it is going to give me another 3/4 inch surface area supporting the weight of that fly rafter against sag. The only piece that I have to cut that's strange at all is this little quadrahedron here in the corner to make the trim come out square with the soffit and fascia boards and what I'm going to put on the front of the shed. This piece technically isn't necessary. There is going to be primed painted sheathing behind it, but I think the flush look and the white fills it out a little bit nicer. The roof is getting shingles. Everything around me is shingles. Shingles are cheaper than metal, and I've done shingles dozens of times. I'm sure I could figure out a metal roof, but I've never done it. And frankly, I just don't see the need for it. The cheapest shingles you can buy have a 20-year lifespan. And even if they rot in 15 and I have to replace them, I'm going to think 15 years from now, if this shed is still in good enough condition that it warrants a new roof, it's a job well done. And the last piece is the doors. As we mentioned, the side door is a pre-hung 30-inch man door, nothing special to that. The shed doors I am going to have to build because of the strange size of the opening. Perhaps someday I'll go back and shell out for a 7-foot wide roll-up door on here. But for now, we're going to do 2x4 framing, use the sheathing that we cut out of the hole that we framed for the doors themselves, and just reinforce it with some steel threaded rod or something on the back with a turnbuckle so that I can take up any slack if the doors want to sag here at the loose end where they're not hung. I can pull that up with the steel. I'm not real worried about the doors sagging though. If you'll recall, we have an incredible amount of stud material here. We actually have 12 full inches of stud behind these doors. I'm going to get some really heavy duty hinges and I'm going to put some really long screws through them. I don't think those doors are going anywhere. Okay, that's the grand tour. What about the bill of materials? How am I going to do that? I have a couple of things to reconcile. First, I have a bill of materials that came with the 12x16 shed plans that I purchased. However, I've made changes to the rafters and some other things that make me question whether that's going to really be accurate. There was some overage in that bill of materials, but I don't know that it's necessarily enough to cover every change that I made. So what I'm going to do is turn all these layers back off. And then what I'll do is I'll open up my spreadsheet where I'm going to track the materials. I'm going to turn them on one by one and just simply count noses. Layer 1, the skids, I need 4 16-foot 4x4s. Into the spreadsheet they go, and they're accounted for. The floor frame, I need 2 16-foot pressure-treated 2x4s and 17 12-foot pressure-treated 2x4s. Is this the most accurate way to do it? No. There are plugins to Sketchup that would in theory generate a bill of materials for me, and I don't frankly know why I don't trust those, but I don't. But I think between this sort of manual process, which isn't going to take that long, and reconciling that with the bill of materials I got in my purchased plans, I should get the vast majority of what I need for the shed project. I'm sure I'm going to forget something. I'm sure I'm going to make a couple of more runs down to that home center. But in the end, I think this will get the bulk of it. Alrighty, that's it. Pray for good weather, and hopefully we'll turn this thing from a drawing into a shed in no time. Stay safe, YouTube.